And welcome back to College Football Tradition. It is Wednesday, August 25th. We're here previewing the upcoming college football season 2026-27. Super excited to look at SEC and Big Ten in this episode. My name is Jacob Vanderford. I'm joined here by Lucas Miller, Miller Time. And again, we're talking about SEC and Big Ten. Brian Partiga isn't joining us tonight, unfortunately. He had some prior commitments, so we're going to do our best to facilitate this podcast because I feel like he is just the man at mediating all this conversation. But to start out, Lucas, I want to start out with an SEC trivia question. Um, who was the first freshman quarterback to win a Heisman Trophy while playing in the SEC?
Right away, I thought Tim Tebow, but I feel like it would be way before that, right?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get this. This is probably back in like the 90s or the 80s or something. It's not
Um,
Peyton Manning, is it?
well, okay. I'm seeing Johnny Manziel as the first one in 2012.
Maybe, because I maybe Tebow wasn't a
But
freshman.
yeah, I feel like he probably wasn't a freshman. But like Tim Tebow sounds better in my mind. But I think it is Johnny Manziel. Yeah, he won it as a sophomore, Tim Tebow did. So Johnny Manziel won it at Texas A&M in 2012. And then the next question that I wanted to ask, so this is kind of more of an obscure one. In 1939, which SEC school became the last major college team to finish a regular season unbeaten, untied, and completely unscored on?
They're not currently a program, are they? Or
No, they're in the SEC. They're in the SEC right now.
uh Auburn?
No, they have similar colors or one similar color.
Um, it would be either Texas or Tennessee, I guess.
Yeah, it's Tennessee.
Wow. All right.
Yeah,
That's that's
crazy,
kind of
crazy
surprising.
stats. I know. But yeah, those are the two trivia questions we have to start out tonight. As we always do, try to do a little mini game before going into the rest of the podcast. But on this episode, we're going to be talking about the SEC to start out. We obviously have a lot of great teams in the SEC this year. You've got your typical teams, Georgia, Alabama, your LSUs of the world. Although LSU had a down year last year, but bringing a lot of firepower in this year. And you've got some teams that maybe are sliding down this year based on folks that players that have transferred out, recruits, things like that. Just new faces in this league. So, Lucas, you want to talk about maybe Georgia to start out and what you're looking for on that team?
Yeah, I mean they definitely have a pretty good amount of experience bringing back quarterback Gunnar Stockton. Once again, he's kind of proven to be a kind of a premier quarterback in the SEC thus far in his career. I believe he had taken them to the SEC championship previously. So they're kind of a team that usually they're built off of experience, especially on the defensive side of the football. And now this year, having that much experience on the offensive side of the football, especially with the run game, that's something that's always highlighted with the Georgia Bulldogs offense is how good they are running the ball. They still have Nate Frazier, who is one of their lead backs last year, and then they bring in a couple of good receivers as well. One of them being Isaiah Canyon. He's a transfer from Georgia Tech, so he comes over from their rival. And then they bring back London Humphreys, which was another receiver that they had last season, who was very efficient for that offense. He averaged 15 point 3 yards per catch. So they definitely have a lot of production coming back on both sides of the football. And then they have 13 of their 18 defenders from last season coming back. So that's a lot of production. Like we're talking about when we see Georgia reach the national championship, when we've seen them win the national championship. Um, it's the defense that is always really talked about. But, we remember that one season that they had so many defenders get drafted into the NFL. A ton of them were on the Eagles, to the point where it was like they were calling them the Philadelphia Bulldogs. So, they're a team that's always very prestigious in this conference for having, great running backs and great defenders. And I think this year we'll see them, carry that forward once again. Um, looking at their schedule. I see you have them here, Jacob, is going 10-2, which a lot of times, going 10-2, that'll reach you to the SEC championship game, and likely a playoff spot. So, that's definitely something that the Bulldogs will look to do this season. They have a couple of key games that are at home, in Auburn. That's a rivalry game. Vanderbilt, who was really good last year, and in Oklahoma, who I'm pretty high on. They play all of them at home. They travel to South Carolina and they travel to Arkansas. And then they also travel to Bama and Ole Miss, which are two of the more notable games on their schedule this year as far as road games go. That'll be a great one, on September. I believe it's on October 10th, actually, Alabama and Georgia. So, yeah, I think that this year you would probably look for a bounce back year in a way, for Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, in terms of them, reaching the college football playoff and beyond that.
Yeah. Well, now I guess going to another school that's pretty familiar and coming from the this school tree, Kirby Smart, obviously the defensive coordinator at this school previously at Alabama Crimson Tide. Obviously, we've got Kalen DeBoer going into his third year, trying to live up to those Nick Saban expectations. Um, you're getting some new quarterback potential into the fray here as Ty Simpson goes to the NFL. Kind of a controversial draft pick for the Rams early on in the first round this past year, but got a lot of good returning players. We want to talk about Alabama, Lucas.
Yeah, so we just saw Keelan Russell, named the starting quarterback at Alabama this past week. There was a lot of, debate on whether it would be him or it would be Austin Mack. Getting that job, we saw Austin Mack play a little bit in the Rose Bowl, I believe, against Indiana, this past season. But Keelan Russell seemed to clearly beat him out, in this competition, and he seems to have a pretty high ceiling, like we've seen a lot of Alabama quarterbacks have over the past couple seasons. On the offensive side of the ball, they got to have somebody to throw to. Ryan Williams is back, Ryan Coleman Williams. He was sort of off last season. Obviously, a lot of people would notice that, compared to his, phenomenal freshman season that he had. He had those spectacular plays in so many games for them when he first started out. I would look for him to bounce back tremendously this year. I don't see why he couldn't. Um, and they seem to have a lot of depth at that position. They brought in, Noah Rogers, which is a receiver from NC State. So DeBoer, if we know anything from his previous stop at Washington, they had a great receiving core there, when they went on to make the college football national championship game against Michigan. And I would hope that for DeBoer's sake, I mean, so many Alabama fans are used to the success, over the years of Nick Saban. I would hope that DeBoer can really, put something together at this point for Alabama where they get back to that standard of them being at the top of top of the SEC. Which I think that, like, going into this season, they do have the potential to do so. Clearly they have, a schedule where they face pretty many opponents that it's going to be tough with how strong the SEC appears to be at this point. But going back to just what that offense looks like, they have, a couple of running backs that they come in, that are really young. They have, Xavier Crowell, who's a freshman. They have Lazier Brooks, who's a sophomore, and then Rico Scott, another sophomore. So the offense is actually a pretty young group of guys this year. Also with the likes of Russell as well. He's a number two prospect from 2025. So it's once again a kind of young class on the offensive side of the football, aside from Ryan Williams, who, he is still rather young, but he's going into what, his third season now. So I would look for this offense to be really high powered, like we're used to seeing from Alabama. And then on the defensive side of the ball as well, they were really good last year, and they bring back a couple of key pieces. They brought back Xavier Brown, which if you remember, he made a bunch of really great plays last year on the defensive side of the ball. And then Dijon Lee Jr. is another corner that they bring back. And then they also actually return safety Bray Hubbard. So this is a team that, like on the defensive side of the ball, they're just like Georgia is. They always have so much talent and they're always very together and they play great off of each other, whether it be the linebackers, the defensive ends, or back in that secondary. So, I think that Alabama this year has a potential to kind of match what they usually are looked at to be. The beginning of their season, I think they have a couple games where DeBoer can kind of get his feet under him because it seems like there's so much chaos from that fan base around Kalen DeBoer being there. And like rightfully so, I guess, because of the standard that they have for this team. But like I said, going to the beginning of the season, they have East Carolina, Kentucky, Florida State, South Carolina, and Mississippi State. In my mind, I would think that they would win all those games. I don't see Florida State picking them off this season. And then you have that huge matchup against Georgia, which they host this year. And then after that, they go right to Tennessee. Then they host A&M. You get a bye week and then LSU. So it's four really tough games against premier opponents in the SEC for Alabama. But I think that they'll honestly fare pretty well in some of those matchups. The game at LSU will probably be tough, and I would think that playing at home against A&M is also going to be a tough game, but I see them winning that one. And then you obviously get the Iron Bowl at the end of the year. But there's a certain stretch this year where I think Kalen DeBoer is probably going to face one of the toughest tests thus far since he's been at Alabama, which is playing back-to-back rivalry games. You get A&M, and then you go to another rival at LSU. It is going to be a pretty tough year for DeBoer and the Tide, but I think they'll fare pretty well.
What about that Oklahoma Sooner team? I know you're pretty high on them. Brent Venables' fifth season as head coach. Um, Obviously, defensive coordinator previously, stops at Clemson, things like that. And then they've got Mateer coming back, John Mateer, quarterback. A lot of people thought he was going to be a Heisman contender before hurting his hand kind of mid-season. So give me kind of a highlight rundown of what Oklahoma is going to look like this year.
Yeah, that's definitely a team that I've been high on. I honestly just love, watching John Mateer. So rooting for them is pretty easy for me. But yeah, this is a team that made the college football playoff last year. They end up losing to Alabama. Um, so now they're coming back this year. Venables just got an extension. I think he's got, every right to have any kind of momentum for this team going into this season. Um, but yeah, it kind of all starts with John Mateer on the offensive side of the football. We saw him get injured last season. He has definitely gotten a hype train loaded up on him for being in Heisman talks, and rightfully so. I mean, we've seen him run the ball, and when he's healthy, he's a great quarterback. But he'll definitely need help, obviously, from other players on that offense. They added a running back, Lloyd Avant from Colorado State. And then they also have in a pretty hefty number of transfer linemen. That would be five offensive linemen that they have transferred in. So it's kind of a whole revamped offensive line and running back room. Aside from returning a couple of rushers from last season, they still brought in another transfer as well. And then on the receiving side of things, Isaiah Satenia is back again on this offense. He was really good for them last season. So he's kind of going to be, I would think, like a glue guy on that offense for Mateer to go to. It'll be one of his top weapons. And then this was actually pretty interesting. I remember back in the offseason when this move happened, they brought in Parker Livingstone from Texas. So bringing in a transfer receiver from their rival is pretty big. And then one of the best names in college football arrives at Oklahoma in Rowdy Beers, or Rocky Beers, sorry, a tight end. He comes in from Colorado State. So they definitely have a pretty good number of weapons between the running backs and the receivers for Mateer to really spread that offense out, which, if you remember back in the days of Baker Mayfield being there, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, they definitely had a very spread out type of offense. They had so many great receivers. They could run the ball well as well. So I think Oklahoma is in a pretty good spot this year. They go to Michigan, they go to Georgia, and they go to Florida. They also play at Missouri at the end of the year. So a couple really tough road tests for them. And then they obviously get the Red River Shootout against Texas. So their schedule wise, I mean, I it is obviously kind of daunting if you look at it from the standpoint of playing at Michigan and at Georgia. But I think they win that Missouri game at the end of the year. They play A&M at home. That's also really late in the year, so we don't really know what A&M is going to look like at that point. If Mateer and Reed are both healthy, that is going to be a shootout on the offensive side of the ball. Um, but yeah, I think Oklahoma's gearing up for a pretty good season this year. Making the playoff last year, I think that they have, any right to get back there this year. But that game early in the season at Michigan and the game early in the season at Georgia will probably, kind of tell the tale for the Sooners.
Yeah, I remember that Parker Livingstone transfer was really interesting in the college football world, transferring from Texas to Oklahoma, obviously in that Red River rivalry. Kind of switching gears, going over to the Texas Longhorns. This is one of those teams that, they got so many transfers coming in this year. Obviously, Arch Manning is one of those players that was in Heisman talks early on last year. Obviously, didn't have the season that we quite expected from him. But in Steve Sarkisian's sixth year, this should be a team to be reckoned with in the SEC. One of the big parts of this team that I'm really interested to see is their backfield. You've got Hollywood Smothers coming in from North Carolina State. You've got Arizona State's Raleek Brown as well coming in. Both players over 1,000-yard rushers at their previous stops, so should have some pretty high upside in that backfield. Um, then you've got some wide receivers coming back. You've got Ryan Wingo, you've got Emmett Mosley, and you've got Cam Coleman coming over from Auburn, which is another huge pickup for the Longhorns as well. Um, the defense should be in pretty good hands. Colin Simmons, you've got Jelani McDonald, you got Grayson Littleton, a lot of good players on the defensive line there. And then you got some linebackers and Ty Anthony Smith. You got a cornerback and Cade Phillips. And then a few pretty good transfers as well. One coming from Pitt in Rasheem Biles, excuse me, and then a corner coming from Rutgers and Bo Musco. This is a team that has Will Muschamp as the new defensive coordinator. There are two really big defensive coordinator hires, I think, in both the SEC and the Big Ten. In the Big Ten, it's at USC with Gary Patterson, former TCU head coach, and then with Texas, it's Will Muschamp. So this should be a pretty exciting season for the Texas Longhorns. I have them winning at least 10 games this year. I think they're going to make the playoff. Just looking at their schedule, you've got Texas State. You've got Ohio State early on in the year again, which will be tough. But this one is going to be at home at Royal Stadium. So that should be a pretty interesting game there. I think that Texas could pull an upset over Ohio State in that game early on in the year. I think that's imperative. If they lose that game, we saw last year when they lost early on at Ohio State, that kind of caused them some of the gears to unravel a little bit. But the rest of the season, you got Tennessee, you got Oklahoma. I think the other big game that could cause them some trouble, you've got Ole Miss on October 24th. You've got LSU on November 14th, and then to round out the year, you've got A&M. I think you need to win at least two or three of those games. If you lose to Ohio State, you got to win three of those games. If you beat Ohio State, I think you can afford to lose two. So that is my outlook on that Texas Longhorn team. Going into another team within the Longhorn State, Texas, you got Texas A&M. The Aggies, obviously, Mike Elko is coming back for another year. This is his third year with the program, coming over from Duke. He's still got Marcel Reed coming back as top quarterback. You've got running back Ruben Owens the second. Obviously, you lose Le'Veon Moss in that backfield in previous years. He was a top tier running back for them in the SEC. Ruben Owens is nothing to sneeze at though. You got some wide receivers, Mario Craver, Ashton Bethel Roman, some good defensive players as well. TJ Searcy, you got linebacker Damian Sanford. So some really, really good players that are returning for Texas A&M. Not a ton of transfer help from them. They did get Ryan Henderson from San Diego State. and Aoto Saka from Northwestern on the defensive side of the ball. That should help with their pressure in the passing game and the running game. Getting the quarterback. But overall, this is a pretty solid team coming back after a playoff season where they lost to Miami, who eventually went to the national championship. So this should be a team that can make some noise in the SEC. And then kind of rounding out the SEC for us, just talking about kind of our highlight teams tonight. You got LSU Tigers. Now, this was a pretty big soap opera of an offseason for Lane Kiffin. He decides to leave Ole Miss and go to LSU and try to rebuild this team that Brian Kelly had in the previous years. Now, LSU going into last season, Garrett Nussmeier, a lot of people were projecting him to be a Heisman Trophy candidate. They had some pretty solid players there. Just didn't turn out to be a good season for that team. Obviously, Lane Kiffin dives into the transfer portal, gets a ton of players from Ole Miss, gets Sam Levitt, who is a a veteran player from Arizona State, could be a Heisman candidate this year. You've got Jace Brown from Kansas State as well, who's one of those players that I think could be really good for that team. And then a bunch of other players from other schools, Group of Five, Old Dominion, Trey Brown the third, as well is also a wide receiver there. And then you've got O lineman Jordan Seaton coming in from Colorado, should be a solid player. I really like Prince Will Umanmielen from Ole Miss. He's a defensive end that used to play for Nebraska as well. Has a lot of great pressure, good sack totals, tackles for loss. So I think this is an LSU team that could be pretty good this year in the SEC as well. And I think it could be a team that could win 10 games. You start out the season against Clemson. That's going to be at home, though, for them. I think LSU should be able to win that game with Clemson losing. Cade Klubnik. You've got A&M later on in the season, September 19th. That's a a date on your calendar. They play at Ole Miss. So Lane Kiffin goes back to Oxford, Mississippi to play his former team. Um, but other than those games, I think LSU should be able to win the rest of their games. Could potentially see a slip up against Auburn. That's at Auburn. They play Alabama at home. Texas potentially, but that's also at home. We just talked about Texas. That could be a slip up game for Texas there too. So I think LSU is definitely a 9-10 win team this year, especially with Sam Levitt leading the charge.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how high are you on Sam Levitt going into this season?
I like him a lot. I think he's going to be a Heisman candidate. I think in the SEC there is a few Heisman candidates that I'm looking at. I think Sam Levitt for sure, Trinidad Chambliss from Ole Miss. I think Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed to me is so much like Lamar Jackson in his ability to scramble, and I've talked about this at length in previous seasons too. But I think he's going to be up there. Potentially Cam Coleman as a wide receiver. We saw a taste of what he can do at Auburn last season, but I think if Arch Manning can continue to throw the ball, that could be a wide receiver that we look at in the Heisman race. Obviously, Arch Manning is up there. But those are a few candidates that I'm kind of looking at in the Heisman race. Obviously, John Mateer, like we've talked about, potentially Keelan Russell, although we haven't seen much from him. But yeah, I think Sam Levitt kind of leads the pack in terms of potential Heisman candidates there at LSU.
Yeah. There's just so many great quarterbacks going into this season in the SEC. It's honestly great to see because that's something that, we've always been used to, growing up watching college football is that the SEC always has really great premier quarterbacks in that league.
For sure. Well, Lucas, I don't have Zoom Pro like Brian does, so we might have to stop this Zoom since we have about 6 minutes left on the timer, and then hop back on another one for the Big Ten. But that is our preview on the SEC schedule. Some of the highlight teams. Quickly to kind of round out the episode, if we, I'm gonna just quickly go through some of these teams that are also in the division in the league that could do fairly well. Some teams that we're a little bit lower on. Looking specifically at Tennessee, you've got Brandon Faison, who's just named the new starting quarterback there. Former five-star quarterback coming out of high school. That's a team for me that I think is going to be on the lower end of the SEC. Missouri, you've got former Ole Miss quarterback Austin Simmons before Trinidad stepped in. He was a really good quarterback for Ole Miss. So I think Missouri could be in good standing there. Obviously, Ahmad Hardy at running back, he could be a potential Heisman candidate as well. Led all of college football, I believe, last year in rushing yards. So that's a potential team to look out for. I know Brian has thoughts about Missouri. They're usually in the top 25, but they don't really inch out of that 20 to 25 range typically. South Carolina, a team that has Lenore Sellers, but just hasn't been able to get over the hump in previous years. Florida, John Summerall at head coach. They just named Aaron Philo the new starting quarterback. Auburn, I'm really high on Byron Brown. I think this is a guy, he had 3,000 plus yards passing, 1,000 yards rushing on the ground. We didn't even talk about him in the Heisman conversation that we just had. He joins his former head coach, Alec Golish, at Auburn. And I think that's a team to kind of look out for that could be a sneaky pick to make some noise in the SEC. Mississippi State, Arkansas, and Kentucky. I'm not super high on. I don't know about you, Lucas, but Kentucky is one of those teams that potentially could win a few surprise games. I think Will Stein comes over from Oregon, the former offensive coordinator there, Oregon. Kenny Minchie originally was committed to Nebraska, then makes a just a surprise switch and goes to Kentucky. And so that's a pretty good quarterback, formerly of Notre Dame, that is also a dual threat that could potentially, like I talked about, be a surprise team, make some upsets. I think Kentucky beat Florida last year, so maybe some upsets like that. But any of those teams that you're looking at, Lucas, that stand out to you or could potentially make a run this season?
I don't know about make a run, but I think that Florida has a lot of talent on their roster, especially now with naming Philo the quarterback. I'd be interested to see what he can do. I believe he comes over from Georgia Tech. So they're kind of a team that every year you see them like beat somebody at some point, and they're usually fairly decent. Um, I don't know about what type of run they could make. I mean, I would say that they sometimes, they sit there at like the 8-4 mark. But yeah, I mean they're usually a team that plays very competitively no matter who they're going up against. So I think that that's probably out of the ones that you were just talking about, Florida is probably one I would look at. And then again, like Auburn, I always love watching Auburn every year. Um, and I'm excited to see what Byron Brown can do in that offense. And especially early on in the season, he plays DJ Lagway in their first game. That one's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And they're honestly always pretty tough when they face off against opponents like Georgia, LSU, and Bama. So those games I'm pretty excited for, especially for Auburn.
Yeah. Should be an exciting year. It's like an exciting season for the SEC. A lot of good teams, a lot of good quarterbacks, like we talked about. Pretty solid defenses as well. Defenses that can stop some of those passing games from those quarterbacks, can get after the passer, and get some sacks this season. So should be pretty exciting. Lucas, as we round out the SEC pod tonight, who do you have in your SEC championship at the end of the season?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, there's really a handful of teams that I think are at the top that can win it, and there's then like a second tier that I think they would sneak into the playoff, with not playing in the conference championship game. I think that Georgia honestly can make it back this year. Um, it's just very difficult to predict with them because of that Alabama game being like so early on in the season. I think the winner of that game is definitely set up in like prime position to make not only the SEC championship but get a very high seed in the college football playoff. And I'm predicting Georgia wins that game and ends up going on to be in the SEC championship game. Um, Now on the other side of that, I really am kind of rooting for A&M this year to make the conference championship game. I love Oklahoma and I love Mateer. I think, like I said, they're a team that like they could be on the outside kind of looking in. But we saw so much potential from Marcel Reed in that offense last year. If the defense can kind of like just improve the slightest bit from what they were last season, I think that they can be a really dangerous team this year. They have a couple games that they are absolutely must win games. Those ones that I'm thinking of are against Texas and at LSU, because I think even if they were to drop the game against Bama or at Oklahoma and they have two losses, they could sneak in. Um, but I would love to see A&M versus Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Yeah, man, if I were to pick, now I can't remember. We SEC doesn't have divisions anymore. They don't have the East and West, right?
No,
Okay, so anybody can just be in it, right?
yeah,
Okay. Given that, I think I'm gonna say LSU and Texas. I need to look at the schedule and see like head to head who could win, who could lose, whatever. But for me, I think that would be the most exciting matchup. Just looking at it, you have Sam Levitt, you have Arch Manning, you have a lot of star power in the receiving core, running backs, all of that. Like I think it would just be a really, really exciting game. Not to say that like A&M and Georgia wouldn't be an exciting game. But I think just there'd be a lot of fireworks with Texas and LSU.
for sure. Well, I think that'll do it for the SEC pod.
That's it. For Lucas Miller, I'm Jacob Vanderford. Peace out.